guys, this is Judy from Patterns for Pirates, and I'm going to sew up some swim bottoms with you today. I have a youth size here. It's a 3 width with a 5 length. So I have my front and back and my partial lining piece. I'm just going to partially line these today. Although I have the youth bottoms, the adult will be exactly the same. So I'm going to grab my main front and main back, and I'm going to align them at this center crotch notch. And I'm going to put a pin or clip in there. I'm going to grab my lining. My lining, you can't really tell the front and the back, but it's a little bit smoother on one side, and that's what I call the right side. So I'm going to put it right sides to my back piece. So here's my front piece, you can tell because the narrow crotch curve, then my back piece, and then my partial lining piece, all pinned at that center notch. Now I'm going to go to the outside of these opposite curves, and you can tell there's like a little notch on the front piece. And so you'll trim off this little triangle right here, but it should match at that notch. That notch just kind of helps you align exactly where the seam allowance is. You can put another pin in on this side. It's pretty small since it's a small youth size. On the adult size, I add a few more pins. Okay, and I'm just going to sew along this with my 3/8 inch seam allowance. To do, because swim can be super slippery, is I like to put a pin right at the very beginning and not take it out. My knife is turned off, so I'm going to engage my knife. Not take it out till the very last minute. Sometimes I'll even use it as another finger to kind of hold the fabric in place. Go nice and slow. You're easing in opposite curves, and it's really easy for swim fabric to kind of shift. So again, I'm just going to remove this pin really slowly to try to get that edge as perfect as possible. So you should end right at that notch down here on both sides so that you get a nice smooth transition from the back to the front. What you're going to do is shake them out so that your partial lining piece goes towards the front. And it should be the exact same shape right here as your front piece. You can leave this raw if you like. Usually what I do is I just serge it. It gives it a little bit of a finish, especially if your lining fabric is on the cheaper side, which it's just lining, so I often will buy cheaper lining. Sometimes it will actually want to get runs in the fabric, and so you definitely want to serge it if your fabric is wanting to do that, or fray in any way. It doesn't really fray, and it really just gets runs is what it usually does. If you have a nice quality liner, you don't even really have to worry about it. Then you'll just do whatever your preference is on the way that it feels and looks. So all I'm doing is putting some pins along the sides, my 2 raw edges, just keeping them in place. It should again match the shape exactly the same. Now we're just going to treat it as one. I'm going to fold my pieces to where they're right sides together, And I'm just going to stitch down these side seams with the same 3/8 inch seam allowance. Again, on swim, I really like to grab a pin and put it at the very end, or at the very front, and not take it out until the very last minute to try to keep those from sliding around there at the front. You can also baste them at the top if you're having trouble taking off with your serger and keeping them even. You can just do a really quick baste right there. Now we have a full little pair of briefs that are inside out. I'm going to grab my 3/8 inch swim elastic. My little ones are up here today, if you can hear her having a very hard time being quiet. I prefer the cotton swimwear elastic. You can use the rubber if you like. I just find this is softer and more comfortable personally. So I'm going to go around the top first. I usually like to stick some kind of little tag in there for my daughter, but it's not really necessary, especially for older ones, because the front and back are shaped so differently. But I'm just going to grab a little piece of elastic actually, because I have that close by. And what I'm going to do, I like to press all my seams to the back, so I'll press this seam to the back. But all I'm going to do is serge around the top, serge the elastic to my swim bottoms along the top. I'm going to attach it to the wrong side of the fabric. I'm not going to trim or cut anything off except for like these serger tails can be cut off. So usually what I do is I actually disengage my knife so that I don't accidentally trim anything off. I am not going to pull, stretch my fabric or my elastic as I'm sewing. And since I have my knife off, I'm just going to trim this with my little scissors. You're just going to go all the way around, not stretching the elastic or the swim bottom. At the very bottom of my roll of elastic here, so parts of it are a little bit folded up, if you can see that. So once you're done, you shouldn't see waves. If your fabric and your elastic is wavy, that means you're easing in the elastic, meaning you're putting too much elastic to swimsuit. See how mine is nice and flat? It didn't change the shape or length around my swimsuit bottoms. If your swimsuit fabric is gathering a little bit or pulling in, that means you're stretching your elastic and it's too small. You really just want to feed it in nice and easy, one-to-one. Now we're going to do around the bottoms. You basically do the same thing. The only difference is around this little booty curve. And I'm going to show you a trick. Instead of ever having to use measurements, which I just find I find it so much easier to just grab my elastic off the roll and feed it in. What you're going to do on this booty curve, it curves out if it's a full coverage brief. So as you can see, my booty curve curves out like this. And instead of following that curve out, what you're going to do is you're going to make a straight line with your elastic. And that's how much you want to stretch it. So not much. Okay, so I'm just going to pin it there. And then that's all I'm going to pin it, because the rest of the way you're just going to be feeding it in 1 to 1. My baby girl is giving me some presents. So again, around the booty curve is the only spot where we are going to be stretching a tiny bit. And that just helps it hold it under those very curvy parts of our body. And then this is for a full coverage brief. If you have a adult bottom that's cheeky or bikini cut or Brazilian cut, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't go cut under the cheeks, then you might not have any curve here, and you won't want to stretch it. We have a little curve here. This is a full coverage little girl's brief, so we'll want to stretch it just slightly there. It'll stretch more too when we fold it under and hem it, because where you're folding it will be an even smaller spot than where you're attaching it. I get asked all the time where I get my big old spools of elastic. Just get them from Amazon usually. We're still a little bit hard to find because of the quarantine. And so this time I ordered from So Sassy. I got these are the ones that I got from Amazon, but I have some sitting over here that are big giant rolls that I got from So Sassy. So we're coming around to the front. I like to overlap about 1/2 inch just to make it secure. Thank you. Okay, so here is our leg elastic. So again, the front really shouldn't change the shape. It shouldn't make it wavy. It shouldn't gather it. The back will pull it in just slightly. You don't want a ton of gathers. Now on an adult brief, you might have some gathers, and that's okay. They'll be pulled out when you put them on. Because an adult, if it's a full coverage brief on an adult, it's going to curve a lot more because we're a lot curvier than youth sizing. So you might see some gathering on an adult brief that's a full coverage brief because the curve is much more drastic there. And then when they're put on, the gather should pull out because it will be tight. I'm just repeating the same thing on the other side. I usually always like to start and end my elastic just behind the partial lining. So it's a little thicker right there. I usually do it just behind that, so I'm not making it super thick all in one spot. But it really doesn't matter where you start and stop. Whatever you find the most easiest spot. Okay, I'm getting to that side seam. So again, what I'm going to do is instead of following this curve on the outside, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a straight diagonal line, just like this. And I'm going to overlap. Here's my partial lining. I went about 1/2 inch behind it. I'm just going to go all the way to the partial lining this time so that they overlap about 1/2 inch. Okay, one more time. Here's my booty curve. My side seam, I just passed my side seam. Here's my booty curve. I'm going to make it a nice straight line. And I'm just going to pin that right there. It's overlapping about 1/2 inch. And the overlap happens right after this seam. Okay. And all I do is I grab it around the middle, pull it to the side. On an adult, I'm probably going to have to throw a few more pins in it since this one's so small. I don't feel like I need more pins. Woo! Alright, and we have our elastic in. How quick are these little bottoms? Now I'm going to twist you over to my cover stitch. On my cover stitch today, you can also finish these on your normal sewing machine. My favorite stitch to finish on a sewing machine is a triple step zigzag. And a lot of times I will use that over my cover stitch. Actually, all I'm doing is adding a little piece of elastic here at the center back for my daughter. It's really not that necessary because the fronts and backs are shaped so differently, but I find she still likes it, so I'm gonna throw it in for her. You can do anything, a little piece of the swim fabric or whatever you want to mark it. I'm putting in some pins. All I'm doing is folding the elastic down and putting in some pins. I like to do that because sometimes even though you don't think you are stretching or easing in, you get most of the way around and then find that you were in fact either easing some in or stretching it out. With elastic, it's so much more stable than your swim fabric. It's really quite easy to do that. So I almost always put pins around to make sure that I'm keeping it nice and even all throughout. Alright, so my top is all done. I'm just going to run this through my cover stitch real quick. And you know what? I threw in my pins the wrong way. So I'm going to have to be grabbing them the wrong way to take them out. Since I'm doing it on my cover stitch instead of my machine. That's okay. You're using 3/8 inch elastic. So if you're using a cover stitch, the wide needles are going to cover pretty much the whole thing. You can also do the more narrow or a triple stitch, whatever you like the look of. Where you're attaching the elastic is going to be slightly smaller than where you attached it the first time. And that's because we folded it down. So it's just naturally at a bit wider, which the briefs along the top really don't change very much, but you'll see on the legs a little bit more. Here's my tag. I'm just folding it with my fingers. You can also baste that in if you want it nice and perfect. If you are new to swim, basting will be your best friend. Swim fabric On the legs, you're going to notice a little bit more that where we're top stitching now is a smaller spot than where we attach the elastic to. So even along the front where we did not stretch the elastic at all, you're going to have to stretch it slightly, attaching it now. Where we did stretch it slightly to attach around the booty curve, you're going to have to stretch it a little bit more. And that's just simply because when you're folding it under, it's now hitting a bigger part of a curve than where you attached it. So just know that you will have to stretch it slightly as you're sewing it. That's okay. That's why I like to make sure to pin it a few different spots to make sure I don't get all the way to the end and then realize that I haven't stretched it enough. And you can see, here's the amount that I'm going to have to stretch. You can see it's a little gathered here. So I'm just going to pull it until there's no gathers. And that's it. No more. You don't want to overstretch it. The more drastic your curve is, the more you will feel the difference. Okay, and I'm just going to repeat on the other side. And we'll be done. We'll have a complete pair of swim bottoms. They really are so quick to sew up. Okay, so I'm just going to trim down her tag a little bit more. Can really save you some frustration in the end. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing I just did on the top on the two legs. So I'm going to fold it under. I'm going to remember. Okay, now we're all done. We have a complete pair of swim bottoms. How quick were those? There we go. I hope you guys enjoyed sewing along with me, and I can't wait to see your finished pairs.